My husband always treated me like a failure. After I earned a full scholarship to Stanford Law on my graduation day, my father announced I'd inherit everything. Our family's $57 million company, a brand new Lexus, and our $7 million mansion in San Francisco. I stayed quiet in the back until a stranger walked in, handed me an envelope, and whispered, "It's time to show them who the real loser is." My father wasn't supposed to be at the Bennett charity gala. Ethan had specifically told security that Robert Johnson wasn't on the guest list. Yet there he stood at the microphone, holding an envelope that would destroy 7 years of carefully constructed lies. "Before you celebrate the Bennett family's achievements," my father announced to 500 of San Francisco's elite, "let me tell you about Sarah Johnson. Yes, Johnson, not Bennett, who earned a full scholarship to Stanford Law while her husband told everyone she was a failure." The ballroom froze. Champagne flutes stopped midway to lips. Ethan's hand gripped my wrist so hard I knew there'd be bruises tomorrow, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and something like fear. I sat at table 17, the one pushed against the service corridor where Ethan always positioned me at these events, far enough from the main action that I couldn't embarrass him with my supposed inadequacies. But now, every eye in the room had found me. 6 hours earlier, I had been in our townhouse kitchen in Seattle, preparing Ethan's breakfast with the mechanical precision of someone who'd learned that deviation meant conflict. Egg whites with truffle oil, whole grain toast cut diagonally, orange juice with exactly 3 ice cubes. The Princeton reunion invitation sat on the counter, Ethan's sticky note attached. "Don't embarrass me this time." Last year's reunion remained a catalog of failures. He still recited my use of the wrong fork at dinner, my community college background, the way I'd smiled too much at the bartender. I had tucked my Stanford Law textbooks deeper into my work bag, checking twice that the zipper was fully closed. Ethan monitored everything: bank statements, credit card charges, even the mileage on my car. But he hadn't thought to check the storage unit I rented under my maiden name, where I kept my study materials and the laptop I'd bought with cash saved from skipping lunches for 6 months. At work, Emily had noticed the crackers again. She always noticed. The medical billing office where we both worked wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. 8 hours where Ethan couldn't reach me, couldn't correct my posture, pronunciation, or opinions. Emily slid half her sandwich across the break room table without comment. She knew about Ethan's financial audits every Sunday night, the spreadsheets where I had to account for every penny while he drank scotch that cost more than my weekly salary. "Tonight's the gala?" Emily asked quietly. I nodded, already dreading it. The Bennett Foundation Charity Gala was Ethan's favorite stage, where he could display his philanthropy and connections, while I served as the cautionary tale, the charity case he'd married, proof of his generous nature. His mother, Evelyn, would be there, ready with her backhanded compliments. His sister, Lauren, would whisper to her friends while glancing at my dress, the same black one I'd worn to every Bennett event for 3 years. The afternoon crawled by. Each medical claim I processed felt like another bar in the prison Ethan had built around me with his constant diminishment. 7 years of being told I wasn't smart enough, polished enough, or bred enough for the Bennett world. 7 years of shrinking myself to fit the narrow space he allowed me to occupy. When I got home, Ethan was already in his study on a conference call, his voice carrying through the walls, confident, commanding, the voice of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. I stood in our bedroom, looking at the black dress hanging in the closet. The hem needed mending again, the fabric wearing thin at the seams, but it was the only thing Evelyn hadn't openly mocked, calling it appropriate for Sarah's position. I was sewing the hem when I heard Ethan end his call and dial another number. "Make sure security has the list," he said. "Robert Johnson is explicitly excluded. I don't need Sarah's father making some scene about his little tech company. The man doesn't understand proper society." My needle paused mid-stitch. My father had sold his tech company 3 months ago for $57 million. Ethan didn't know. I'd been very careful that Ethan didn't know, just like he didn't know about Stanford, the scholarship, or the late-night study sessions in a 24-hour diner across town, where I memorized case law and wrote papers on justice while he slept peacefully in our bed. The ride to the gala was typical. Ethan drove his Audi while lecturing me on appropriate conversation topics. "Don't mention your job. If someone asks, you're between positions. Don't discuss politics. You don't understand the nuances. And please, Sarah, try not to look so desperate when you smile. It's unseemly." I stared out the window at Seattle rushing by, counting down the months. 6 more months until 7 years. 6 more months until the prenup's most restrictive clauses expired. I'd been doing this calculation daily, sometimes hourly, like a prisoner marking time. The Bellevue estate glowed with wealth, every surface designed to remind guests of the Bennett family's superiority. Ethan abandoned me at the entrance, joining his Princeton friends at the bar, while I found my place at table 17. Always table 17, always by the service door, always alone, except for whichever elderly donor needed a place to rest their feet. I was sipping water, watching Ethan perform his success, when the impossible happened. My father walked onto the stage. Robert Johnson, in his simple suit he'd probably owned for a decade, standing among people who spent more on a watch than he had on his car. But he stood there with the confidence of someone who'd built something real, something earned. Then he spoke. My name, my real name, Sarah Johnson. The world tilted. Ethan's carefully constructed narrative, 7 years of systematic diminishment, 7 years of being called a failure, crumbled with a single sentence. Stanford Law, full scholarship. The words echoed through the ballroom like an accusation. Ethan's grip on my wrist loosened as security moved toward the stage, their earpieces crackling with urgent commands. The ballroom erupted in whispers, 500 people processing what my father had revealed. Stanford Law, full scholarship. The words hung in the air like an indictment of everything the Bennetts had said about me for 7 years. Evelyn Bennett rose from her seat at the head table, her face a mask of controlled fury. She moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of someone who'd weathered social scandals before, though probably never one like this. Her diamonds caught the light as she gestured sharply to security, trying to regain control of her carefully orchestrated evening. I remembered our arrival 3 hours earlier, sitting in Ethan's Audi as we approached the estate. The dashboard lit up with a text from Jessica. 3 heart emojis followed by, "Missing you already." Ethan swiped it away without even trying to hide it, his eyes never leaving the road as he continued his pre-gala lecture. "Remember, if anyone asks about your career, you're exploring options. Don't mention that medical billing office. It's embarrassing. And if the conversation turns to current events, just smile and redirect. You don't have the background to contribute meaningfully." His words washed over me like they always did, each one chosen to remind me of my place. The prenup sat between us like a third passenger, invisible but ever present. 6 more months, he'd reminded me that morning, casual but pointed. It'd be a shame if you threw away 7 years over something trivial, he'd said, watching me organize his vitamins, especially when you'd leave with nothing. The receiving line at the gala entrance had been its own special torture. Evelyn positioned herself at the door like a general reviewing troops, her cheek kisses distributed according to a complex hierarchy only she understood. Senators received genuine warmth, CEOs got professional courtesy. When she reached me, her lips barely grazed the air beside my face. "And this is Ethan's wife," she told the mayor's wife, her pause before wife stretching just long enough to be insulting. "She's between careers at the moment." The mayor's wife, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, looked at me with unmistakable pity. "Oh, how nice, taking time to find yourself." Ethan laughed, that bright, false sound he deployed at these events. "Sarah's still figuring things out, aren't you, darling?" His hand on my lower back pressed just hard enough to be a warning. Lauren Bennett appeared then, Ethan's younger sister, all sharp angles and sharper tongue. "Sarah, you wore the black dress again. How consistent of you." Her friends tittered behind their champagne flutes, a chorus of privileged amusement. I made my way to table 17 after that, my designated spot at every Bennett event. The place card had my name written in elegant calligraphy, positioned at the table nearest the kitchen doors, where servers brushed past constantly, their trays clattering. The elderly gentleman beside me, Mr. Worthington, fell asleep before the appetizers arrived, his gentle snoring the only conversation at our exile table. From that vantage point, I watched Ethan work the room. He moved between groups with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his welcome anywhere. At the head table, surrounded by investment bankers and hedge fund managers, he launched into his favorite story, the one about his wife's attempt to understand cryptocurrency at a dinner party. His hands moved in familiar patterns, mimicking my supposed confusion, my adorable incompetence. The laughter that followed carried across the ballroom, each chuckle another small cut. Michael Lee, Ethan's Princeton roommate, was particularly amused. "God, Ethan, where did you find her? It's like Pretty Woman, except Julia Roberts never quite figures out which fork to use." "The rescue mission continues," Ethan replied, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Some projects take longer than others." I was staring at my untouched salad, practicing the breathing exercises my therapist taught me before Ethan found out about the sessions and canceled them, when movement near the service door caught my eye. Through the narrow window, I saw him, my father, Robert Johnson, wearing the same gray suit he'd worn to my college graduation, arguing with two security guards. His work boots, the ones he refused to replace despite having sold his company, stood in stark contrast to the marble floor. The envelope in his hand looked official, legal, important. One security guard reached for it, but my father pulled it back, his voice rising just enough that I could hear fragments through the door. "My daughter, 7 years, the truth." My heart started hammering. I hadn't seen him in 2 years, not since Ethan orchestrated the final break. "Your family holds you back," Ethan had said after a particularly tense Thanksgiving. "They don't understand our world. It's for your own good." He'd made it sound logical, caring even, but really, he couldn't risk them seeing what he was doing to me. The security guards were getting more aggressive, one speaking rapidly into his earpiece while the other tried to guide my father away from the door. But Robert Johnson had built a tech company from nothing, negotiated with venture, capitalists, and hostile boards. 2 security guards weren't going to stop him from whatever he'd come to do. Then my father did something unexpected. Instead of fighting through the service entrance, he walked away. The guards relaxed, probably reporting the situation handled. But I knew my father's tactical retreats. He wasn't giving up. He was finding another way in. 5 minutes later, he appeared at the main entrance, not skulking or hiding, but walking straight through during a shift change when one set of guards was briefing their replacements. He moved with purpose, not running, but not hesitating, heading directly for the stage. Evelyn had been introducing the evening's program when my father climbed those steps. The microphone was live, the entire room watching. And then he spoke my name, my real name, not the diminished version Ethan had created. Everything I'd hidden for 6 months came spilling into the light. 7 years of lies end tonight, my father repeated, his voice cutting through the chaos as security guards reached the stage. He held the envelope higher, and something in his stance, the set of his shoulders, the steel in his eyes, made them hesitate. This wasn't some drunk party crasher or activist with a cause. This was a father who'd waited long enough. My father looked directly at Ethan, who stood frozen at the head table, his face drained of color. Ethan Bennett, you've spent 7 years telling everyone my daughter is a failure. You've paraded her around these rooms like a rescued animal, proof of your charitable nature. His voice grew stronger with each word. But while you were playing with your daddy's trust fund, buying yachts you named after yourself, I built Johnson Technologies from a garage startup into a $57 million technology empire. The ballroom seemed to inhale collectively. I saw Michael Lee's mouth fall open. Evelyn Bennett's hand went to her throat, fingering her pearls like a rosary. The security guards stopped advancing, looking between my father and Evelyn for direction. Ethan finally found his voice. This is ridiculous. Robert, you're embarrassing yourself. Security, remove this man immediately. But my father wasn't finished. He pulled papers from the envelope, each one crisp and official. Let me tell you what my daughter has been doing while you called her worthless. He held up the first document, and even from table 17 I could see the Stanford seal. Sarah applied to Stanford Law School in secret. She took the LSATs at a testing center 40 miles away so you wouldn't find out. She studied in 24-hour diners, in library basements, in her car during lunch breaks. My hands were shaking so violently I had to press them flat against the table. Every secret I'd guarded, every late-night study session, every hidden textbook, my father was laying them bare before 500 people. She didn't just get accepted, my father continued, his voice rising. She earned a full scholarship, perfect LSAT score, perfect grades while working full-time and managing a household where she was treated like staff. She graduates next week, first in her class, and not one of you knew because she was so terrified of what Ethan would do if he found out. Evelyn Bennett's gasp was audible across the ballroom. Ethan's champagne glass slipped from his hand, crystal shattering against marble, golden liquid spreading like a confession across the floor. The sound broke whatever spell had held the room silent. Whispers erupted everywhere. That's impossible, Ethan said, but his voice had lost its authority. Sarah barely graduated community college. She's not capable of being brilliant? Of succeeding despite you? My father interrupted. You've spent 7 years trying to convince her she's nothing, and still she rose. That's not weakness, Ethan. That's strength you could never understand. Movement at my table made me turn. An elegant woman in her 60s appeared beside me, silver hair swept into a chignon, wearing a simple navy dress that somehow looked more expensive than all the designer gowns in the room. She sat down in the empty chair, her movements deliberate and calm despite the chaos around us. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I'm Judge Margaret Sullivan. Your father asked me to give you this when the moment was right." She placed a thick envelope in front of me, heavier than paper should be. "I think that moment is now." My fingers fumbled with the seal. Inside were documents that made my vision blur. Bank statements showing Ethan had lost $2 million on failed investments, money he'd hidden by taking loans against properties he didn't fully own. Email printouts between him and someone named Jessica, planning what they'd do with my jewelry, my grandmother's ring, after the divorce was final. But it was the transcript that stopped my heart, a recorded conversation between Ethan and his lawyer dated last week. I read Ethan's words. "Sarah is genetic trash. She was never meant for our world. The prenup ensures she gets nothing, and she's too stupid to realize I've already filed. I'll keep her thinking she has 6 more months while I move assets offshore. By the time she figures it out, there won't be anything left to divide." Judge Sullivan's hand covered mine gently. "Keep reading," she said. The next section detailed Ethan's fraud, false financial declarations, hidden accounts, tax evasion going back 3 years, each crime documented, witnessed, notarized. On stage, my father was still speaking. "Tonight, my daughter inherits everything I've built. Johnson Technologies, all $57 million, the Seattle townhouse on Pine Street, the entire investment portfolio I've spent 30 years growing." He looked directly at me across the ballroom. "And parked outside is the Lexus LS I bought for the daughter who never stopped fighting, even when the world tried to break her." Evelyn. Bennett's wineglass fell from nerveless fingers, Bordeaux spreading across white linen like blood on snow. Lauren Bennett was frantically typing on her phone, probably texting their family lawyers, her face pale with the realization of what this meant for the Bennett family image. Ethan started moving toward me, his face twisted with rage. But Judge Sullivan stood, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years on the bench. "Mr. Bennett, I'd advise you to stop right there. The prenuptial agreement you've been using to control your wife is void." "That's impossible," Ethan snarled. "That contract is ironclad." "Contracts based on fraud are never ironclad," Judge Sullivan interrupted. "Your documented financial crimes, the hidden assets, the emotional abuse evidenced in these recordings, any court in Washington would void this agreement. Mrs. Johnson," she emphasized my maiden name, "is free to leave whenever she chooses. More importantly, given your attempted fraud, she's entitled to significantly more than the prenup would have provided." The room erupted, voices rising in shock, gossip, and the gleeful scandal that would feed Seattle dinner parties for months. I saw reporters pulling out phones, society matrons whispering behind their hands. Ethan's business partners backing away like fraud might be contagious. Ethan's Princeton friends were no longer laughing. Michael Lee had stepped behind a pillar, distancing himself from the explosion. The investment bankers at the head table were having hushed, urgent conversations, probably calculating their exposure to Ethan's failed investments. Lauren Bennett made one last, desperate attempt. "This is entrapment. You can't just—" "I can provide evidence of everything," my father said calmly. "Every document authenticated, every recording legally obtained. Your brother built his own trap, Lauren. All we did was let him fall into it." I stood up from table 17 on legs that felt like water, holding the envelope full of evidence that changed everything. 7 years of being diminished, of being told I was nothing, and all along I'd been becoming everything Ethan said I couldn't be. The envelope's weight in my hands anchored me to reality as I pushed back my chair from table 17. The screech of metal against marble cut through the ballroom's chaos, and suddenly 500 pairs of eyes locked onto me. My second-hand black dress, the one I'd worn to every Bennett event for 3 years, suddenly felt different against my skin. Not shabby or inadequate, but like armor I'd been forging without realizing it, each thread strengthened by every insult I'd endured. The path to the stage stretched before me, 40 feet that might as well have been 40 miles. Guests pulled back as I moved forward, creating a corridor through designer gowns and bespoke suits. I heard someone whisper, "Is that really her?" "The failure," another voice responded. "Apparently not." Ethan lunged from his position, near the head table, his fingers catching my wrist. The same grip he'd used 1,000 times to steer me where he wanted me to go, to position me like a prop in his perfect life. "We need to talk about this privately," he hissed, his breath hot against my ear. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're doing." I stopped walking but didn't turn to face him. The entire ballroom held its breath. "You don't get to touch me anymore," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. I pulled my arm free with emotion that came from somewhere deeper than thought, from 7 years of suppressed autonomy finally breaking the surface. Ethan's hand hung in the air where my wrist had been, and I saw the exact moment he realized he'd lost control. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Behind him, Michael Lee had his phone out, recording everything. The Princeton Brotherhood was documenting their friend's downfall. As I continued toward the stage, movement in the crowd caught my eye. There, standing between 2 senators' wives, was Emily from the medical billing office. My Emily, who'd shared her lunch when I couldn't afford my own, who'd held my hand under breakroom tables while I cried about Ethan's latest cruelty. She stood there in a simple blue dress I recognized from Target, her phone raised and recording, tears streaming down her face. When our eyes met, she gave me a thumbs up and mouthed, "Finally." My father's voice found me as I reached the stage steps. "I invited someone who actually cares about you, sweetheart. Someone who's seen the truth all along." Emily's presence changed everything. Among 500 faces that had watched my humiliation for years, there was one person who'd seen me, really seen me, not as Ethan's disappointing wife or Evelyn's embarrassing daughter-in-law, but as Sarah. Just Sarah. Judge Sullivan helped me up the final steps to the podium. The microphone waited like a weapon I'd never known I could wield. "I'm going to read you something," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing through the ballroom, barely recognizable as my own. "This is an email Ethan sent to Michael Lee last month." Michael's face went white. He lowered his phone, suddenly wishing he could disappear into the marble floor. I read Ethan's words slowly, letting each one land like a verdict. "Sarah is proof that you can't polish trash, but she's useful for now. She cooks, cleans, and asks for nothing. The prenup ensures she'll leave with nothing, and she's too broken down to realize she could fight it. Best investment I ever made, a living servant who thinks she's a wife." The ballroom erupted, not in laughter this time, but in genuine shock. I saw Ethan's business partners exchanging glances, pulling out phones, probably checking contracts and partnerships. One man, a banker named William Carter, who'd laughed at Ethan's stories about my incompetence just an hour ago, was already heading for the exit. "There's more," I continued, pulling out another email. "This one's to his attorney, sent 3 days ago. Move the offshore accounts timeline up. Sarah's getting suspicious. If she finds out about Jessica or the hidden assets, we need everything transferred before she can file. Evelyn Bennett stood up from the head table. This is slander. You can't prove. Judge Sullivan stepped to the microphone beside me. Mrs. Bennett, I've authenticated every document. Moreover, the prenuptial agreement your son forced Sarah to sign contains provisions that violate Washington state law. She pulled out a copy of the prenup, certain sections highlighted in yellow. Article 7, Section 3 states that even in cases of documented physical abuse, Sarah would forfeit all marital assets. Article 9 invalidates any claim she might have, even if Ethan committed fraud. These clauses are unconscionable and void as a matter of law. Lauren Bennett shot up from her seat. Our lawyers will fight this. You can't just— Your lawyers, Judge Sullivan interrupted calmly, are welcome to review my filing with the court this afternoon. Any attempts to intimidate Mrs. Johnson or interfere with these proceedings will be considered witness tampering and obstruction of justice. I'd encourage you to remain silent. Lauren's mouth snapped shut. Her fingers flew across her phone screen, probably texting the family lawyers, but her face had gone pale. She knew what this meant. The Bennett family image, built on generations of calculated superiority, was crumbling in real time. I found Ethan's eyes in the crowd. He stood frozen between tables, isolated in a circle of empty space as guests backed away like his disgrace might be contagious. You spent 7 years telling me I was nothing, I said directly to him, my voice steady. You made me document every penny I spent while you lost millions on failed investments. You made me believe I was too stupid for your world while I was earning perfect scores at Stanford Law. You told everyone I was a failure while I was graduating first in my class. The next document in the envelope was a bank statement. $2 million, Ethan. That's what you lost last year alone, hidden across 14 different investment accounts you didn't think I'd find. You borrowed against properties you don't fully own, committed tax fraud to hide the losses, all while telling me I couldn't be trusted with the grocery money. Someone in the crowd gasped. Might have been Evelyn, might have been anyone. The sound rippled through the ballroom like dominoes falling, each person reassessing what they thought they knew about the Bennett family fortune. Emily was still recording, still crying, still standing witness to my truth. Behind her, I noticed other phones raised, other recordings being made. By morning, this would be everywhere. The carefully constructed image Ethan had spent years building was being demolished in real time. Not by my father's money or Judge Sullivan's legal expertise, but by his own words, his own cruelty, his own arrogance in believing I'd never fight back. The ballroom had become a theater of Ethan's destruction, and he seemed determined to be both director and star of his own downfall. As I stood at the podium with his financial crimes laid bare before 500 witnesses, Ethan pushed through the crowd, his face flushed and wild. Those documents are fabricated, he shouted, his voice cracking on the last word. Sarah doesn't understand complex financial instruments. She's too stupid to comprehend what she's looking at. These are legitimate tax strategies that someone like her could never grasp. I held up another email from the envelope, this one dated 6 months ago. Then perhaps you can explain this message to your accountant, where you write, need to hide the Singapore losses before year-end, create shell invoices if necessary. Sarah must not find out about the extent of the damage. The Princeton contingent began their retreat. Michael Lee was already at the ballroom doors, phone pressed to his ear. Another classmate, Daniel Foster, suddenly remembered he had an early flight. One by one, Ethan's brotherhood abandoned him. their Italian leather shoes clicking rapidly across marble as they fled association with fraud. Evelyn Bennett remained frozen at the head table, her face a mask of disbelief as she watched her son rage against evidence he couldn't refute. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white against the burgundy tablecloth, as if holding on might stop her world from tilting. "This is theft," Ethan continued, spittle flying from his lips. "That money is mine, from my family, my inheritance." "The money you lost belonged to investors," Judge Sullivan interrupted calmly, "some of whom are in this room tonight." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw several men in expensive suits pulling out phones, their faces darkening as they presumably checked their portfolios. Ethan had been playing with other people's money, not just his family's fortune. Movement near the exit caught my attention. A woman in a red dress stood up from table 12, her blonde hair catching the light as she turned toward the stage. Jessica, Ethan's mistress, the one whose heart emojis had popped up on his phone throughout our marriage. She stood there for a moment, surveying the wreckage, then spoke in a voice that carried across the ballroom. "He promised me her jewelry," Jessica announced, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. "Said Sarah's grandmother's diamonds would look better on someone who appreciated them. Told me I could have the townhouse too, once she was gone by Christmas." The words should have hurt, but instead, I felt a strange lightness. Every suspicious late night, every weekend conference, every time Ethan had made me feel paranoid for questioning his absences, I'd been right all along. The relief of validation outweighed the sting of betrayal. "Jessica, shut your mouth," Ethan roared, but she was already walking out, her heels clicking a staccato farewell. "He said you were too damaged to leave," she added over her shoulder. "Said he'd broken you down so thoroughly you'd never have the courage to walk away." The doors closed behind her with a definitive thud. Lauren Bennett chose that moment to make her move. She charged toward the stage, her designer gown hiking up as she took the steps 2 at a time. "This is enough," she shrieked, reaching for the microphone. "Sarah, you ungrateful little nobody. We welcomed you into our family, and this is how you repay us?" I stepped back, letting her grab the microphone. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people reveal themselves. "Those investment losses were supposed to be confidential," Lauren continued, her face red with fury. "The board wasn't supposed to know about the Singapore accounts or the Caribbean holdings." She stopped mid-sentence, realizing what she'd just admitted. Judge Sullivan was already writing in her legal pad, documenting Lauren's confession that she knew about Ethan's fraudulent activities. "Miss Bennett," Judge Sullivan said quietly, "you've just admitted to knowledge of securities fraud. I suggest you stop talking and contact your attorney." Lauren's face went from red to white in seconds. She backed away from the microphone, nearly tripping over her gown as she stumbled down the stairs. Her phone was out before she reached the floor, fingers fumbling as she presumably called the family lawyer. Evelyn Bennett finally found her voice, rising from her chair with the imperious bearing of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. "Enough of this circus," she declared, her voice carrying the authority of old money and older prejudices. "Sarah was nothing before us. Nothing. We took pity on her, gave her a life she could never have achieved alone. We tried to elevate her, to teach her, to make her worthy of the Bennett name." Judge Sullivan raised her phone, recording Evelyn's words. "Please continue, Mrs. Bennett. This is excellent evidence of the hostile environment my client endured." But Evelyn was beyond stopping. her composure finally cracking after watching her son's empire crumble. We had a plan to fix her. Ethan was doing important work, breaking down her ridiculous middle-class pretensions, teaching her how to be grateful for what she'd been given. Every dinner, every event, every interaction was designed to show her what she really was, a charity case who should thank us for tolerating her presence. The ballroom went completely silent, even the waitstaff stopping, trays forgotten, as they witnessed Evelyn Bennett confessing to 7 years of coordinated psychological abuse. "We all knew she wasn't good enough," Evelyn continued, gesturing wildly at the crowd. "You all knew it too. You laughed at our jokes about her failures. You whispered about her secondhand clothes. You understood that she was Ethan's burden to bear. And now she stands there pretending to be something she's not, destroying a family that showed her nothing but generosity." My father stepped forward from the side of the stage. "Generosity?" His voice was quiet but dangerous. "You systematically destroyed my daughter's self-worth while she earned a Stanford law degree. That's not generosity, Evelyn. That's cruelty dressed up in designer clothing." The room's energy shifted completely. Where there had been shock and scandal, now there was disgust. The elite of Seattle society were seeing the Bennetts for what they really were, already calculating their distance from the fallout. Ethan made one last desperate attempt, his voice breaking as he shouted, "None of this changes what she is. She's still a nobody, still worthless, still standing," I said quietly into the microphone. "After everything you did, I'm still standing." The ballroom erupted, not in laughter this time, but in something else. Applause started from Emily's corner, spreading through the room as people began to understand what they'd witnessed tonight. Not just the exposure of financial fraud, but the public unraveling of a man who'd built his identity on crushing someone else's spirit. Ethan stood in the middle of the ballroom, isolated in a circle of empty space. His Princeton friends gone, his mistress departed, his family's reputation in ruins. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without the armor of inherited privilege and social position. The applause continued as I stepped down from the stage, my legs trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The crowd parted again, but this time their faces held something different. Respect, perhaps, or at least recognition that I was more than they'd been told to believe. As I reached the bottom step, 3 people approached me purposefully, their faces familiar but unexpected in this context. "Sarah?" A woman with graying hair and kind eyes touched my arm gently. "You probably don't remember me. Carol Hayes. I was head of accounting at Bennett Industries until 2 years ago." Recognition flooded through me. Carol had been at one Bennett Company dinner, seated far from the main table like me. Ethan had introduced her dismissively as one of the numbers people, before ignoring her for the rest of the evening. "I was terminated for questioning discrepancies in the quarterly reports," Carol continued, her voice steady but emotional. "The same transactions you just exposed. Ethan accused me of incompetence and had security escort me out. 23 years with the company gone in an afternoon." Behind Carol stood 2 men I vaguely recognized from Ethan's office. The younger one, Andrew Kim, had been an analyst. Ethan enjoyed humiliating during meetings. The older, James Larson, had run the Singapore office before it, mysteriously closed. "We all saw irregularities," Andrew said quietly. "When we raised concerns, Ethan destroyed us professionally, blacklisted James from every firm in the city, spread rumors about my work ethic. Carol couldn't get another position for 18 months. James stepped forward, his weathered face serious. "We've been documenting everything, Sarah, keeping records, gathering evidence. We just never had the platform or credibility to expose it. But now, with what you've revealed tonight, our testimony could help ensure Ethan faces real consequences." Carol's hand squeezed mine, and her next words shattered the composure I'd maintained throughout this ordeal. "We all knew how he treated you, Sarah. Every company event, every time you visited the office, we saw it. The way he dismissed you, belittled you, made you small. I'm so sorry none of us spoke up sooner. We were all too afraid of losing our jobs, our reputations. We failed you." The tears came then, hot and sudden. Carol pulled me into an embrace, and I sobbed against her shoulder, while 500 of Seattle's elite watched. I didn't care anymore about appearances or propriety. These 3 strangers had seen my pain when the people who claimed to love me had inflicted it. Through my tears, I felt familiar arms wrap around me from behind. My father's voice, steady and warm, whispered in my ear, "I've got you, sweetheart. Let it out. You've been strong for so long." I turned in his arms, burying my face against his chest the way I had as a child when the world felt too big and frightening. His suit smelled of the same aftershave he'd worn my entire life, a constant in a world that had tried to reshape me into something I wasn't. "You never needed their approval," he murmured, stroking my hair while the ballroom watched. "Not Ethan's, not Evelyn's, not any of these people's. You were always enough, Sarah. More than enough. I should have fought harder to stay in your life. I should have pushed back when Ethan isolated you." This embrace felt different from any touch I'd experienced in 7 years. Ethan's hands had always been performative, positioning me for photos, steering me through crowds, marking possession, or they had been controlling, gripping too tight, holding me in place, but never comforting, never safe, never home. Emily appeared at my side, mascara streaked down her cheeks, joining our embrace. Here, in this ballroom full of millionaires and power brokers, the people who truly cared about me formed a protective circle. Carol, Andrew, and James stood nearby, creating a buffer between us and the gawking crowd. From across the room, I noticed the head caterer, Marcus, directing his staff with pointed precision. Ethan's table, where he stood isolated and rage-filled, had been cleared of everything: wine, water, even bread. Meanwhile, a server appeared at my elbow with a fresh glass of champagne and a small plate of canapés I hadn't ordered. One caught my eye and winked. Earlier that evening, I'd witnessed Ethan berating him about the champagne selection, calling him incompetent and threatening to ensure he never worked another society event. The staff had heard it all, had watched Ethan's cruelty for years, and now they were choosing sides in the smallest but most meaningful ways. Judge Sullivan approached our group, waiting patiently until I'd composed myself enough to acknowledge her. When I met her eyes, she pulled me slightly aside, her voice low and intense. "Sarah," she began, her professional demeanor softening. 40 years ago, I was you, married to a man who made me feel worthless, who convinced me I was nothing without him. The difference is, I didn't have a father brave enough to storm a ballroom. I didn't have evidence of fraud to void a prenup. I stayed." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I stayed for 23 years until Michael died of a heart attack at his desk, still controlling me from beyond the grave through the will he'd crafted. 23 years of my life disappeared into his ego. I went to law school at 51, became a judge at 60, but I'll never get those decades back." She gripped my hands with surprising strength. "You're 29 years old, Sarah. You're brilliant, accomplished, and about to graduate from Stanford Law. You have your whole life ahead of you, and you're free. Do you understand what a gift that is? You're braver at 29 than I was at 50. Her words hit me with physical force. Around us, the gala continued its chaotic unraveling. Security guards were escorting Evelyn and Lauren Bennett out while they shouted about lawsuits. Ethan's business associates huddled in corners, their phones pressed to their ears as they presumably tried to distance themselves from the scandal. But in my small circle of unexpected allies, time seemed to pause. Don't waste another minute feeling guilty for saving yourself, Judge Sullivan continued. Not 1 minute. Men like Ethan, families like the Bennetts, they count on our guilt, our need to be polite, to be understanding. They weaponize our empathy against us. But tonight, you turned their weapons back on them. That takes courage most people never find. Judge Sullivan's words echoed in my mind as the ballroom descended into controlled chaos around us. Security guards were attempting to restore order, while guests either fled the scandal or pressed closer to witness more drama. In the midst of it all, I noticed Ethan had disappeared from his isolated spot near the abandoned head table. Where did he go? Emily asked, scanning the crowd nervously. Before anyone could answer, a server approached our group. Mrs. Bennett, he said quietly, and I almost corrected him before realizing old habits die hard. Your husband went toward the library. He seemed agitated. My father stepped forward protectively, but I placed a hand on his arm. I need to face him one more time. Alone. Absolutely not, my father said firmly. Sarah, he's desperate and dangerous. Emily and security can wait outside the door, I said, pulling out my phone and starting the voice recording app. I need him to say what he really thinks when there's no audience. I need that closure. Judge Sullivan nodded slowly. Get him on record. Anything he says now could be crucial for the divorce proceedings. The library sat at the far end of the estate's east wing, its mahogany doors closed but not locked. I could hear Ethan inside, glass clinking as he poured himself something from the bar. Emily positioned herself in the hallway with 3 security guards, all of them recording on their phones as I pushed open the door. Ethan stood by the window, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his audience and armor of superiority. When he turned to face me, his eyes held a wild desperation I'd never seen before. Sarah, he said, his voice attempting charm but landing closer to pleading. We can fix this. All of it. Just you and me. We can make this go away. I stayed near the door, my phone recording in my hand. There's nothing to fix, Ethan. He moved closer, switching tactics with the fluidity of someone used to manipulating situations. I'll give you a generous settlement, $3 million tonight. All you have to do is go back out there, tell them it was a misunderstanding, and sign an NDA. We can divorce quietly in 6 months, and you'll be set for life. $3 million? I almost laughed. You lost $2 million last year alone. Where exactly would this money come from? His face darkened. Don't act smart with me. You don't understand how money works at this level. I have resources you couldn't even imagine. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, Switzerland, Singapore. Places your little community college education never taught you about. You mean the illegal accounts you've been hiding from the IRS? I kept my voice steady, watching him realize he'd just confessed to tax evasion on record. Ethan lunged forward, his hand clamping around my wrist with bruising force. You're nothing without me, he snarled, whiskey breath hot against my face. Nothing. I made you. I gave you a name that meant something. Without me, you're just another nobody with a worthless degree from a school that only accepted you out of pity. The pain in my wrist was sharp, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I looked him directly in the eyes. Stanford accepted me on merit, Ethan. First in my class. And you know what's funny? You're the one who's nothing. Without your family name, without inherited money, without people you can step on, who are you? He raised his other hand as if to strike me, but I spoke calmly and clearly. Emily is right outside that door with 3 security guards, and they're all recording this. Ethan's hand froze midair. His face cycled through rage, fear, and finally a kind of broken desperation. He released my wrist, stumbling backward. I pulled off my wedding ring, the modest band he'd complained about for 7 years. You spent $3,000 on this ring and acted like it was a fortune, I said, setting it on the library desk. You spent more than that on dinner last week with Jessica. This was never about money, Ethan. It was about respect, something you never gave and never earned. The library door burst open. Evelyn Bennett stood there, her makeup smeared, her perfect composure finally shattered. She looked between Ethan and me, then rushed to her son. "Sarah, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't destroy us, the family name, the company, everything we've built." "Everything you've stolen, you mean?" I kept recording, watching Evelyn's face as she realized the trap she was walking into. "We didn't steal anything," she protested. We protected Ethan from himself. When he started losing money, we covered it with funds from his trust. When those ran out, we borrowed against properties. We kept up appearances because that's what families like ours do. We protect each other." "You mean you lie for each other?" I said quietly. "Generation after generation, covering failures with fraud, building a dynasty on deception." Evelyn's confession tumbled out, years of secrets spilling like wine from a shattered glass. His grandfather did the same thing, lost everything in the 80s, rebuilt with questionable loans. Richard covered his father's debts with insider trading, and we covered Ethan's losses because that's what Bennetts do. We survive. Ethan grabbed his mother's arm. "Shut up. Stop talking." But Evelyn was beyond stopping, her world crumbling, taking everyone down with her. "We knew about Jessica, about the hidden accounts, about the prenup violations. We knew he was planning to leave you with nothing, and we helped him structure it. All of us, Lauren, Richard, me, we were all complicit." I looked at both of them, this mother and son who'd made my life misery for 7 years, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. They were prisoners of their own making, trapped in a cycle of lies that went back generations, each one covering for the last, none of them ever learning to stand on their own merit. "I have everything I need," I said, holding up my phone. "Confessions, admissions of fraud, evidence of conspiracy. Judge Sullivan will have all of it by morning." I turned to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped me. "You'll regret this, Sarah. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never practice law." "Ethan," I said without turning around, "you already tried to destroy me. For 7 years you tried, and I'm still here. You're the one who's destroyed." I walked out of the library, past Emily and the security guards who were still recording, through the ballroom where the party had essentially ended. Guests were fleeing the scandal, like rats from a sinking ship. I passed table 17 one last time, that place of exile that had been my assigned seat for so many humiliating evenings. My father waited at the entrance, Lexus keys in his hand. Behind us, Ethan had followed, stumbling, shouting threats about lawsuits and revenge, his voice breaking with rage and desperation. but I didn't turn around. "The only revenge I need is living well without you," I said over my shoulder. The last image I had was in the Lexus's rearview mirror. Ethan collapsed on the mansion's marble steps, his mother beside him, both finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless, to be dismissed, to be nothing in the eyes of the world they'd tried so hard to impress. The Lexus pulled away from the Bennett estate as my father drove us through the night toward Seattle. In the rearview mirror, Ethan remained collapsed on those marble steps, growing smaller until he disappeared entirely. My wrist throbbed where he'd grabbed me, already bruising in the shape of his fingers, but the physical pain felt insignificant compared to the strange lightness filling my chest. 7 years of weight had been lifted in a single evening. The Seattle townhouse stood quiet and waiting on Pine Street. My father had arranged for Ethan's belongings to be packed during the gala, and boxes lined the entryway like soldiers standing guard, each one labeled in the moving company's efficient handwriting: E. Bennett Clothing, E. Bennett Books, E. Bennett Office, an entire life reduced to cardboard and tape. "I'll stay tonight," my father offered, but I shook my head. "I need to do this alone." He understood, kissing my forehead before leaving me in the townhouse that had never felt like home until this moment. I walked through each room, seeing it differently now that Ethan's presence had been extracted. The study still smelled of his cologne and whiskey, but his awards and diplomas were gone from the walls, leaving clean rectangles of paint protected from years of sunlight. I made coffee at 5 a.m. in a kitchen where I could finally eat without judgment. No more measuring portions to avoid Ethan's comments about my weight. No more timing my meals around his schedule. I found his sticky notes everywhere. Behind the coffee maker, inside cabinet doors, tucked into drawers. Check S's spending. Review S's calendar. Monitor S's phone usage. Each one a small surveillance camera made of paper and ink. I gathered them methodically, these artifacts of control, and fed them to the fireplace one by one. The paper curled and blackened, 7 years of monitoring turning to ash and smoke. With each note that burned, I felt myself returning, like pieces of my identity were being restored from some hidden vault where I'd locked them for safekeeping. Dawn broke through the townhouse windows as I sat in Ethan's former study, surrounded by the ghosts of his presence. But they were just ghosts now, powerless and fading. 1 week later, I stood backstage at Stanford Law School, my graduation gown perfectly pressed, my valedictorian speech typed on cards I didn't need. Through the curtain, I could see the auditorium filling with families, their cameras ready, their pride palpable. My father sat in the front row beside Emily, who'd taken the day off to be here. Judge Sullivan sat with them, having become something between a mentor and the mother figure Evelyn Bennett had never been. When they called my name, I walked across that stage differently than I'd ever walked before, not shrinking, not apologizing for my presence, not making myself smaller to avoid attention. The dean handed me my diploma, whispering, "Your story reached a lot of us, Miss Johnson. Thank you for your courage." At the podium, I looked out at hundreds of faces, my classmates who had no idea I existed until last week when the news broke, professors still processing that their top student had been hiding in plain sight, families who'd come to celebrate achievement and success. 3 years ago, I began, my voice clear and steady. I started this journey in secret, studying in basements and diners, terrified that someone would discover I was reaching for something beyond my assigned role. I was told daily that I wasn't intelligent enough, sophisticated enough, or bred well enough for success. The auditorium was silent, everyone understanding the weight of what I wasn't saying directly. But here's what I learned in these halls. Intelligence without empathy is just sophisticated cruelty. Power without accountability is theft wearing a three-piece suit. And success built on breaking others down isn't success at all. It's failure dressed in designer clothing. I never mentioned Ethan's name, but everyone knew. The story had spread through legal circles, social media, and whispered conversations in law firms across the city. The Bennett heir who'd lost everything in a single night, to the wife he'd called worthless. To my fellow graduates, I continued, I leave you with this. The law isn't just about winning cases or maximizing billable hours. It's about justice, even when, especially when, that justice is personal. It's about standing up for those whose voices have been silenced, whose worth has been questioned, whose existence has been diminished by those who confuse inheritance with achievement. The applause that followed felt different from the applause at the gala. This wasn't scandal or shock. This was recognition, respect, and something that felt like hope. 2 months later, I walked into Johnson Technologies as its new CEO. The building my father had built from nothing now bore my name on the office door. My first act was implementing profit sharing for every employee. The janitor who cleaned offices at night would benefit from the company's success just as much as the executives who worked in those offices. Emily stood beside me as the new head of human resources, her desk in an office with windows, her salary triple what she'd made at the medical billing company. I still can't believe this is real, she said, looking out at the Seattle skyline. It's real, I assured her. We're going to build something different here. Andrew Kim, one of the former Bennett Industries employees who'd approached me at the gala, became our new CFO. Carol Hayes returned as head of accounting. Even Marcus, the caterer from the gala, was hired to manage our corporate events. Every person who'd shown me kindness when I had no power now had a place in this new world we were creating. The foundation was Emily's idea. Table 17, From the Margins to the Center, a fund for women escaping financial abuse, women whose worth had been systematically destroyed by those who claimed to love them. The first scholarship recipient was a woman named Rachel, whose husband had hidden her acceptance letter to nursing school. She cried in my office as I handed her the check that would change her life. 6 months after the gala, an envelope arrived through my lawyer. Ethan's handwriting, shaky but familiar. I opened it in my office, Seattle spread below me, my new life established and thriving. Sarah, it read, I know I have no right to contact you, but I had to try. I've lost everything. My family cut me off. The fraud charges destroyed my reputation. Jessica left the day my accounts were frozen. I'm working at my uncle's car dealership in Portland, living in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking if we could start over, if I could prove I've changed. Please. I held the letter for a long moment, this artifact from a life that felt like someone else's story now. Then I filed it away, not out of cruelty, but as a reminder. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. Sometimes it's letting them live with the consequences of who they chose to be, while you become everything they said you couldn't. Outside my window, Seattle pulsed with life and possibility. Table 17 was just a memory now, but the strength I'd found there, in exile, in silence, in survival, that strength had built an empire.